The Senatorum Imperialis chamber stretched vast and cold beneath Gothic arches that vanished into darkness overhead. Braziers burned with eternal flames at each corner, casting dancing shadows across the faces of humanity's greatest minds and most devoted warriors. Lord Commander Robute Guilliman stood at the chamber's heart, a primarch among mortals, his transhuman frame making even the towering space marines seem diminished by comparison. Around the circular table sat the Imperium's power-high lords in ornate robes, heavy with the weight of office inquisitor lords, with servo skulls hovering at their shoulders like mechanical vultures. Chapter masters, whose mere presence spoke of centuries spent in warfare's crucible, and tech priests of the Mechanicus, whose augmented forms clicked and whirred with mechanical precision that had long ago replaced their humanity. They had gathered to assess the galaxy's fate at the twilight of the 42nd millennium. To catalog the myriad ways reality itself seemed determined to unmake the Imperium of man. Guilliman's voice carried the weight of ages as he addressed the assembly, each word precisely chosen, each syllable carrying authority forged when stars were young. The galaxy burned. The great rift split their empire. Chaos gods grew bold. Xenos empires expanded. Yet they gathered not to recite litanies of despair, but to understand what hunted them and what they must avoid provoking. Magos Dominus Belisarius Call's hololithic projection flickered above the table, displaying a galactic map rendered in such detail that individual star systems pulsed like neurons in a vast brain. 5 regions dominated the display, each marked with distinct colors, speaking of different apocalyptic threats. The first glowed sickly green-yellow across the eastern rim, and Brother Captain Stern of the Grey Knights began his report with clinical precision that barely masked profound unease. Hive Fleet Leviathan had encountered something designated as Zerg in a distant sector near the galactic fringe. Initial contact suggested standard Tyranid consumption protocols. The Hive Fleet would devour the Xenos biomass, incorporate useful traits, and continue its advance toward the galaxy's core. What emerged instead had proven far more catastrophic. The Zerg possessed something the Tyranids had never encountered, a combination of biological perfection and tactical intelligence that operated on timescales measured in hours rather than generations. When Leviathan consumed the Zerg Overmind, the absorption should have been routine. Instead, the Overmind's psionic death pattern, a non-warp psychic resonance from another universe, entirely acted as a viral concept, rewriting the hive mind's fundamental logic. The two consciousnesses did not merge through biomass, but through psychic infection. What emerged was something unprecedented, the broodmind ascendant, as Magos Biologies reports had designated it, with barely concealed horror. The resulting hybrid, now termed the Devouring Convergence, combined Tyranid patience with Zerg real-time adaptation. Standard Imperial doctrine against Tyranids relied on the Hive Fleet's predictable evolution cycle, observe their tactics, develop countermeasures, implement across the war zone. The process took months, but proved reliable. The Convergence rendered this doctrine obsolete. Belisar IV exemplified the new threat's capabilities. The Hive world had fallen despite full exterminatus protocols, not because the Convergence overwhelmed its defenses through sheer numbers, but because it learned. Cyclonic torpedoes that should have cracked the planet's crust were neutralized mid-flight, their detonation sequences disrupted by organisms that had evolved electromagnetic pulses specifically calibrated to Imperial warhead specifications. The Convergence had observed one torpedo strike, analyzed its function, and developed a counter within hours. Stern's report grew grimmer. Forward elements had encountered new hybrid organisms that defied categorization. Hormagaunts with Zerg regeneration, capable of rebuilding catastrophic damage in real time. Carnifexes that learned from each wound, developing resistance to specific weapon types after a single exposure. Most disturbing were reports of the Convergence demonstrating strategic patience, deliberately sacrificing forces to study Imperial tactics, then overwhelming defenders with perfectly calibrated responses. 40 planets consumed in Segmentum Tempestus. Projections suggested exponential growth if left unchecked. And unlike standard Tyranid behavior, the convergence showed signs of something approaching long-term planning, coordinating movements across multiple sectors simultaneously. A fortress entity, possibly a tomb complex, possibly something else entirely. 4 years ago, a diplomatic delegation comprising an Inquisitor Lord, 3 Grey Knights, and an entire company of Deathwatch kill teams had been dispatched to investigate energy signatures that defied conventional analysis. None returned. No distress calls, no final transmissions, no wreckage recovered despite extensive search patterns. The delegation had simply ceased to exist the moment they entered the sector designated Nazaryk's zone of influence. Long-range augury detected something massive at the coordinates, a structure that registered on sensors but refused to resolve into coherent data. Tech priests reported their machine spirits becoming agitated when attempting detailed scans, as if the very act of observation was somehow noticed. Certain instruments suffered catastrophic failures, their internal mechanisms corroded by forces that should not affect blessed technology. More disturbing were the refugee reports. 3 merchant vessels had escaped the sector's periphery, their crews babbling about a tomb of darkness, about undead legions that moved with mechanical precision, about a being that sat upon a throne of bones and spoke with authority that predated the Imperium itself. The refugees were quarantined, examined, and ultimately executed when their testimonies proved dangerously inconsistent. Some claimed the tomb's master was skeletal. Others insisted it wore the flesh of a man. Still others swore it appeared as an eldritch horror that defied description. Call's analysis suggested 3 possibilities: a Necron tomb world with unusual properties, a chaos fortress that had achieved some form of permanent manifestation, or, and this was whispered with mechanical reluctance, something else entirely, something that predated both the Necrontyre's transformation and Chaos's ascension. Guilliman's standing order remained absolute: avoid Nazaryk until sufficient data could be gathered. The Imperium possessed too many confirmed enemies to provoke unknown threats without strategic necessity. The third marker appeared deeper crimson near the galactic core, and Malveth continued with words that seemed to physically pain her, as if speaking them aloud made them more real. SCP-23 Unseen, the Scarlet King. The designation came from an organization that operated in shadows darker than even the Inquisition's deepest secrets, a group simply called the Foundation. What little the Imperium knew suggested they had been containing threats to reality itself, since before humanity's diaspora across the stars, since before the dark age of technology, perhaps since before the species learned to speak. They were not part of the Imperium. They answered to no High Lord. They simply existed, working in absolute secrecy to prevent things that should not be from manifesting in real space. The Scarlet King was not a demon. Chaos entities, for all their horror, remained bound by certain rules imposed by the warp's nature. Not a Xenos threat that could be fought with bolter and blade. Not even a god in any sense the Imperium understood divinity. The Scarlet King was something that existed before the current universe learned its own laws, before the concepts of matter and energy had solidified into their present forms. 7 chains. That was all that stood between reality and absolute dissolution. Each chain was not a physical construct, but something woven from the fabric of existence itself, anchored across dimensions by forces the Foundation refused to fully explain, even to Guilliman himself. 3 chains had already broken. 4 remained. With each broken chain, reality degradation events increased exponentially across the galaxy. Worlds where physics simply stopped functioning according to known principles. Gravity reversing without cause, light. Freezing in mid-flight time, flowing backwards for minutes before snapping forward again. Populations that spontaneously ceased to exist, not killed but erased their absence, spreading like infection through records and memories, until even evidence they had ever lived vanished from history itself. Stars turning crimson. That was perhaps the most terrifying phenomenon. Observatory stations reported multiple stars across different sectors, simultaneously shifting from their natural colors to deep arterial red. When astropaths attempted to observe these stars through the warp, they heard something that made their minds break screaming. The stars themselves were screaming, though what could cause a stellar object to emit sounds that registered as psychic agony remained beyond comprehension. Foundation liaisons embedded within certain inquisitorial cells and individuals whose existence was classified above, even Lord Commander Clearance reported projections that chilled every strategic simulation. If the fourth chain broke, reality degradation would accelerate beyond any hope of containment. Entire sectors might simply cease to be not destroyed, but unmade the space they occupied, reverting to primordial chaos that predated the Big Bang itself. If all 7 chains failed, the Foundation documentation used terms like ontological collapse and conceptual deletion with disturbing clinical precision. The Scarlet King's full manifestation would not conquer the galaxy, it would unmake it, unwinding the fundamental forces that allowed matter to cohere, time to progress, cause to precede effect. Reality would not die. It would be revealed to have never truly existed in the first place. No weapons could be brought to bear, no fleet could be marshaled. The Scarlet King existed partially outside the framework of what humans understood as existence. Fighting it would be like trying to punch a mathematical equation or stab the concept of entropy itself. The Imperium's only option was to trust that the Foundation knew what they were doing, that the 4 remaining chains would hold, and that whatever contingencies existed remained sufficient. Prayer seemed inadequate when facing something that predated gods themselves. Malveth's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she concluded, "The Foundation estimates. We have decades before the 4th chain breaks, perhaps a century if we're fortunate. What happens when it does? They refuse to speculate beyond providing us evacuation protocols for entire segmentums. No one in the chamber spoke. What response existed to such information? How did one plan strategy against the unraveling of existence itself? The 4th marker spread crimson and purple across the northwestern quadrants, and Guilliman spoke of the eternal threat with weary familiarity. The Great Rift continued its corruption, splitting the Imperium in 2 and creating a permanent wound in reality through which chaos poured without restraint. The 4 ruinous powers, Khorne, Tench, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, grew bold in their manifestations. Diamond incursions increased by 17% quarterly, each one requiring substantial military response to contain. Black Crusades launched with increasing frequency from the Eye of Terror, forcing the Imperium to maintain constant vigilance across thousands of light years. Standard threat parameters, Guilliman noted, but growing, always growing. The warp itself seemed to hunger more intensely with each passing year, as if chaos sensed weakness in the Materium's defenses and pressed its advantage with patient inevitability. Then, Call's projection shifted, displaying the 5th and final marker. Azure light spread across Segmentum Ultima, and the chamber's atmosphere changed. Where previous threats had been discussed with grim determination, this one brought something else, uncertainty that bordered on genuine confusion. The Tempest Federation. Lord Inquisitor K.L. Corvanus spoke first, his voice carrying barely contained fury. 23 worlds now sheltered under Xenos protection, their populations thriving in ways that made mockery of the Imperium's struggling domains. Agricultural output exceeded Mechanicus predictions by orders of magnitude, 0 mortality from disease or famine, quality of life indices surpassing even Terra's aristocratic levels. Worlds that should have been dying instead flourished under the governance of an entity designated Rimuru Tempest. But this was not standard Xenos conquest. There had been no invasion, no subjugation, no enforced compliance. Populations had entered mutual defense pacts willingly drawn by promises of protection that impossibly seemed to be fulfilled without cost. No tithes demanded, no populations culled, no resources extracted. The Federation simply protected. Malveth offered counterpoint with measured tones. 6 months ago, Rimuru Tempest had vanished, leaving behind subordinates who maintained something called the Tempest Field, a barrier that rendered warp travel impossible within 15 parsecs, while simultaneously preventing any chaos corruption. Not suppressing it, not fighting it, but creating a region where chaos simply could not manifest. The entity designated Diablo exemplified the Federation's capabilities. When 3 Grey Knights Brotherhoods attempted reconnaissance, this single subordinate had destroyed them without sustaining injury. Not defeated, destroyed. The difference was crucial. Grey Knights represented humanity's most potent anti-demon force warriors, trained to combat entities that bent reality itself. Diablo had annihilated over 100 of them as if they were mortal guardsmen. The question was not whether Tempest represented a threat. Anything capable of such power inherently threatened the Imperium's dominance. The question was whether humanity could afford to make an enemy of them while facing the Convergence, Nazarick the Scarlet King, and Chaos simultaneously. Corvanus insisted they must strike now while the Tempest God was absent, while advantage remained. Malveth argued that provoking beings of such power represented strategic suicide. The debate grew heated, voices rising in the chamber's echoing vastness, until Guilliman's voice cut through with Primarch authority. They would observe. They would not provoke. Tempest had earned that consideration. They had destroyed a chaos warband threatening Macraga's eastern border without being asked, without demanding payment, without seeking conquest. Until Tempest proved hostile, the Imperium would focus on enemies actively trying to destroy humanity, rather than manufacturing new threats from potential allies. The chamber settled into uneasy silence, the kind born from exhausted acceptance rather than true agreement. High in orbit aboard the Astronomican relay station, Astropath Prime Helios suddenly gasped. His eye sockets burned away long ago to accommodate the Emperor's gift-wet blood that floated in low gravity like crimson pearls. His attendants rushed forward, recognizing signs beyond normal psychic phenomena. Helios struggled to articulate what his enhanced senses detected. Energy approaching, massive, incomprehensible. Not chaos that he knew intimately through his duties, not standard warp entities, something else, something that felt older than the warp itself, carrying resonances that predated the Materium's current state. Then the station's alarm screamed. In the Senatorum, every hololithic display went crimson simultaneously. Unknown energy signature detected, magnitude beyond measurable parameters, approaching Terra orbit. Estimated arrival 10 seconds. Guilliman moved with transhuman speed commands flowing across multiple Vox channels. Battle stations. Activate orbital defenses. Identify source. 9 seconds. Call's mechadendrites flailed as his consciousness interfaced with Terra's cogitator network. The signature defied analysis, registered as both warp and non-warp, simultaneously violating fundamental principles of reality. Power output equivalent to a stellar object. 8 seconds. Corvanus demanded to know if they faced demonic incursion, if chaos had manifested something beyond recorded parameters. 7 seconds. No chaos taint call, reported sensors painting increasingly alarming data. 6 seconds. Malveth's enhanced cognition processed connections faster than others. The energy frequency matched Tempest field signatures they had been discussing. 5 seconds. But magnitude exceeded Rimuru Tempest's recorded output by exponential factors. 4 seconds, and Guilliman's tactical genius assembled pieces. Not Rimuru. Someone connected to him. Someone whose power dwarfed that considerable entity. Someone searching across the galaxy. 3 seconds, and every defense platform achieved full readiness. 2 seconds, and through the viewport stars began to shift. 1 second, and the sky transformed. Pink light bloomed, bleeding into blue colors, swirling in patterns suggesting geometries beyond conventional space-time. 0. The planet shuddered. Every cogitator crystal cracked. Every psychic ward died. Every blessed candle flickered. In the sky above, Terra space tore open. Not warp breach, not Xenos technology, but something predating such categories. Clean surgical, as if someone had decided dimensional barriers were unnecessary and removed them through will combined with fundamental nature. Through the opening stepped a girl appearing perhaps 12 standard years, barely 5 feet tall. Pink hair containing miniature galaxies, eyes glowing pink-blue as if carrying primordial cosmos within. Casual clothing that ignored vacuum temperature extremes, radiation, all the laws that should have killed her instantly. Every sensor screamed. Reality adjusted to accommodate her presence. Every psychic ward shattered. Every psyker on Terra collapsed, consciousness touching something too vast to comprehend. Every demon within 10 light-years fled in absolute panic. Call's voice cracked through Vox, stripped of mechanical calm. Energy reading exceeded even the Emperor's output during the Great Crusade. Malveth stared at her data slate, watching numbers overflow into infinity. Corvanus whispered, "Who is that?" The figure looked down with childlike curiosity. Her gaze swept through continents, hive cities, defense networks that may as well have been paper. When her attention focused on the Senatorum, buried beneath miles of adamantium and void shields, every person felt her awareness settle like physical weight. Malveth recovered first, voice barely a whisper, but carrying in terrible quiet the power of one who can unmake all creation. The girl appeared in no records, no databases, no archives. Yet hearing it spoken, everyone understood with cold certainty they faced something that existed before the Imperium, before humanity, before the galaxy learned to fear. Roboute Guilliman had commanded armies across 1,000 worlds, faced daemon princes in single combat, made decisions that determined the fate of billions. In his 10,000 years of existence, he had learned to recognize moments when the Imperium's future hung by a thread so thin it could snap with a single wrong word. This was one of those moments. The entity floating in Terra's orbit radiated power that made his transhuman instincts scream warnings. Every tactical calculation suggested the same conclusion. If this being decided to attack, nothing in the Sol system could stop it. Yet it had made no hostile moves. It simply hovered there, looking down at Terra with what appeared to be curiosity. In the Senatorum chamber, Corvanus was already shouting orders for defensive protocols. Malveth clutched her data slate, face pale, as energy readings climbed beyond anything in Imperial records. Tech priests throughout the chamber babbled prayers to the Omnissiah, their composure shattered. Guilliman made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He activated his Vox link, overriding every channel with Primarch authority. All forces stand down. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. I will handle this personally. The protests came immediately, but Guilliman was already moving custodians and Grey Knights falling into step behind him. The journey to Terra's surface took precious minutes, during which the entity simply waited its presence like a star that had decided to rest in planetary orbit. They emerged onto the primary landing platform. Guilliman stood at the platform's edge, looking up at the figure that floated perhaps 100 meters above. Even from this distance, he could feel the weight of her presence, reality itself bending around her like fabric stretched over an impossible weight. He activated his armor's external Vox speakers. "I am Roboute Guilliman, Lord Commander of the Imperium of Man. I welcome you to Terra. We mean you no harm and request the honor of speaking with you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then she moved, not flying in any conventional sense, but simply deciding to be lower. In a single breath, she floated down to stand on the platform, perhaps 20 meters away. Up close, the disparity between her appearance and power became jarring. She looked like a child wearing casual clothing that should have been obliterated by Terra's industrial atmosphere. Her pink hair caught light from no visible source, and her eyes glowed with colors that reminded Guilliman of the universe's birth. She tilted her head, studying him with open curiosity. "You're really big, like even bigger than most people. Are you their leader?" The custodians behind Guilliman tensed, but he raised one hand slightly, signaling calm. "I serve as one of humanity's leaders, yes. May I ask your name?" The entity's face lit up with a smile that was entirely disturbingly genuine. "I'm Milim Nava, and I'm looking for my best friend Rimuru." She gestured enthusiastically. "He came to this galaxy a while ago, said he had something important to do, and I could feel his dragon essence trail leading here, so I thought maybe someone on this planet would know where he went, Dragon Essence." The term meant nothing to Guilliman's databases, but the implications were clear. This Milim possessed some method of tracking Rimuru Tempest across interstellar, perhaps interdimensional distances. More importantly, she considered Rimuru a friend, suggesting a relationship of equals. If Diablo could destroy 3 Grey Knights brotherhoods, and Milim was Rimuru's equal or superior, what exactly was the Imperium dealing with? "We are familiar with Rimuru Tempest," Guilliman said carefully. "He established the Tempest Federation in Segmentum Ultima, however he vanished from known space. His subordinates maintain his territory, but his current location is unknown even to them." Milim's expression shifted, the cheerful enthusiasm draining away. Her eyes, still glowing, took on a quality that made Guilliman's instincts scream. When she spoke, her voice resonated through dimensions the Primarch could sense but not perceive. "He's gone." She stepped forward, and the platform cracked beneath her feet despite her small size. "You don't know where Rimuru is?" "We do not." Guilliman confirmed, fighting every instinct to step back. "His subordinates have constructed a Tempest field that prevents our ships from entering. We cannot contact them directly." The air around Milim began to shimmer, pink and blue light bleeding together. Behind Guilliman, one of the Grey Knights staggered, his psychic sensitivity overloading. "But I need to find him," Milim said, and there was something in her voice that spoke of loss of loneliness. "He promised he'd keep in touch. He promised." Lord Commander Corvanus's voice crackled through Guilliman's vox bead. "Long-range augury is detecting massive energy buildup." Then the Inquisitor himself appeared at the platform's entrance, flanked by Grey Knights in blessed silver armor. His face flushed with fury, features twisted into zealous determination. "Xenos abomination," Corvanus shouted. "You will submit to Imperial authority or be destroyed." Guilliman spun. "Corvanus, stand down." "That is a direct order." But the Grey Knights were already moving, training overriding Primarch authority when they perceived demon-level threat. Psy cannons raised, storm bolters tracked targeting locks, force weapons ignited with psychic fire. Milim's head turned toward them with mechanical precision. "Why are they pointing weapons at me?" Her voice carried genuine bewilderment. "I just asked a question." The Grey Knights opened fire. Guilliman watched in horror as hundreds of rounds, each blessed, consecrated, designed to harm warp entities, streaked toward Milim. Against a normal target, this barrage would have been overwhelming. Milim raised one hand almost lazily, and something manifested around her. Not a shield, but a crown of pure energy forming a rotating barrier. The ammunition struck this aurora crown and simply ceased to exist, not deflected, not absorbed. The rounds touched the barrier and stopped being. She lowered her hand and the crown dissolved. Her expression had shifted to something that made Guilliman's blood run cold. Not anger, not yet, but hurt. The kind of hurt from being attacked when you'd done nothing wrong. "I was just asking about my friend Milim," said her voice, small, but somehow audible despite weapons fire. "Why did you do that?" Corvanus raised his power sword disruption field, casting harsh shadows. His face carried not mere zealotry, but something more calculated. "Because you are Xenos. Because you threaten holy terror." He took a step forward, voice rising with religious fervor. "And because if we cannot stand against the unknown with faith in the Emperor, then we are already lost. This is the test to prove that humanity's conviction can face even gods and not flinch." It was madness dressed as theology. Corvanus believed that by provoking a transcendent entity through sheer faith, he could demonstrate the Imperium's spiritual superiority. "Enough!" Guilliman's voice, amplified and backed by Primarch authority, cut through Corvanus's words. But it was too late. Guilliman could see it in the way Milim's eyes had shifted from hurt to something harder. "You all attack me," Milim said, and her voice had lost its youthful quality entirely. Now it carried harmonics that resonated through warp and materium simultaneously. "And you don't even know where Rimuru is." She raised one hand, palm up, and a sphere of energy began to coalesce above it. Pink and blue swirled together, compressed, grew denser and brighter, until looking at it directly caused pain. The sphere was small, perhaps the size of a human head, but Guilliman recognized apocalyptic magnitude. This was Dragonova, a technique that compressed dragon essence into conceptual deletion, not aimed at them, not aimed at the platform. Milim's gaze had shifted upward toward Terra's sky, toward Luna visible despite industrial haze. "I came here looking for help," she said, and the sphere grew brighter. "I came here worried about my friend, and you attacked me. Milim, wait." Guilliman began taking a step forward. "We can discuss." She pushed her hand upward, and the sphere launched skyward. Not fast, but measured, giving everyone precious seconds to track its trajectory. It passed through atmosphere without disturbing a single molecule, as if the physical world had agreed to let it pass unmolested. At the 45-second mark, the sphere reached Luna's orbit and made contact. A sphere of destruction expanded from the impact point. Not explosion, the matter simply ceased to exist, as if fundamental forces binding atoms had decided they no longer applied. When it finally stopped, Luna had lost nearly half its mass. What remained was a perfect hemisphere, the cut so clean Guilliman could see internal structure exposed like an anatomical diagram. Yet impossibly, the gravitational field remained stable, as if the missing mass had been conceptually replaced by Milim's will, maintaining orbital mechanics through reality override. Terra's tides would not change. Physics itself had been informed that despite appearances, nothing fundamental had changed except that half a celestial body no longer existed. Silence fell across Terra. Every Vox channel, every communication network stopped as billions looked up at their mutilated moon. Milim lowered her hand, energy dissipating. When she spoke, her voice had returned to youthful tone, but carried disappointment that hurt worse than anger. That was a warning. She looked at Guilliman, and despite everything, her eyes still held that fundamental loneliness. "Next time I won't miss." She turned away. "You don't know where Rimuru is. You attacked me for asking. This place can't help me." The air behind her tore open not a warp rift, but a clean cut revealing churning dimensions beyond. Milim began to float backward toward the tear. She paused at its threshold, looking back. "If you see Rimuru, tell him Milim is looking for him, and tell him—" Her voice caught slightly. "Tell him I'm worried." Then she was gone, the tear ceiling as if it had never existed. The only evidence of her presence was the shattered platform, traumatized witnesses, and the bisected moon hanging in Terra's sky like a monument to the day the Imperium learned what true power looked like. Guilliman stood frozen, tactical mind racing through implications. Around him, custodians and gray knights slowly lowered weapons, recognizing those weapons would have been utterly meaningless. Corvanus approached, face ashen. "My lord, you will report to your quarters." Guilliman interrupted, cold fury in his voice. "You will remain there until I decide what to do with you. Your reckless action nearly started a war we could not win. But the Xeno's threat?" There was no threat. Guilliman turned on the Inquisitor. "She came here looking for a friend. She asked a simple question, and you responded with violence, forcing her to demonstrate power to make us understand she will not tolerate aggression." He gestured toward Luna. "That was restraint, Corvanus." "She could have done that to Terra." Malveth approached quietly. "My lord, what do we do now?" Guilliman looked up at Luna's bisected form. "We learned that there are entities in this universe we cannot fight, cannot threaten, cannot even comprehend. And the Imperium's default response of violence toward anything unknown is not merely inadequate, it is existentially suicidal." He activated his Vox link broadcasting on priority channels. "This is Lord Commander Guilliman. All forces stand down to minimal defensive posture. The entity that appeared today is designated the Crimson Starfall. Threat classification: Apex Transcendent. Rules of engagement: do not engage under any circumstances. If encountered, provide requested information courteously and allow free passage. This being is searching for Rimuru Tempest and means humanity no inherent harm. Our survival may depend on ensuring she continues to view us as neutral rather than obstacles." He closed the link and looked at the gathered officials. "Assemble the High Lords. The Tempest Federation is no longer a curiosity to be monitored. It is now the Imperium's best hope of surviving contact with forces we cannot comprehend. Malveth spoke quietly. If Rimuru Tempest inspires such loyalty from a being like that, what exactly is he that Guilliman said? Looking at Luna's wound is precisely what terrifies me, because if Milim Nava considers Rimuru her equal, or if she's afraid for his safety, then what we're dealing with exists in categories beyond our understanding of power itself. Throughout the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, reports began to flow, describing the entity that had appeared demonstrated godlike power and departed without a single human casualty despite being attacked. Terra's billions looked up at their wounded moon and wondered what it meant. And in the warp, following a trail of dragon essence toward the galactic east, Milim Nava continued her search. She had asked a simple question: where is my friend? The answer she received: violence, incomprehension. Fear had taught her that this galaxy understood strength, but not friendship. So she would search alone as she had for so many things across her impossibly long existence. The galaxy had just learned that lesson. Terra's bisected moon would ensure no one forgot it. Forge World Vethra 9 had been producing weapons for the Imperium since before the Horus Heresy. A frontier forge world bordering the Tempest exclusion zone, it served as one of the last bastions of Mechanicus control, before the mysterious Azure Barrier rendered conventional warp travel impossible. Its foundries never slept. Its manufactorums never stopped. Its tech priests never ceased their rituals to the Omniscia. The sky burned red-orange from industrial waste and sacred incense, a perpetual twilight broken only by forge fires and plasma vents. Milim Nava appeared in this world of metal and prayer with considerably less fanfare than her arrival at Terra. The dimensional tear opened quietly in a maintenance corridor far from main production lines. She had learned caution, though. Whether that would prove wisdom or merely delay the inevitable remained to be seen. She stepped through carefully, her small form impossibly fragile amid industrial brutality. The Dragon Essence Trail was here faint, perhaps 3 days old, but unmistakably present. Rimuru had passed through this system recently, likely skirting the Tempest exclusion zone's outer boundary. She needed to confirm her direction to ask if anyone had seen him, knew which path he'd taken into the protected sector beyond. This time would be different. No dramatic entrances, no displays of power, just a simple question, then she would leave. Through an observation port, she watched thousands of heavily augmented workers labor in perfect synchronization. Tech priests in rust-red robes supervised mechadendrites adjusting machinery. Everything here served one purpose: making weapons. She thought of Rimuru, who had built a federation where people didn't need weapons to feel safe. A senior tech priest emerged from a side chamber, his augmented frame laden with monitoring equipment. Milim waited until he'd finished examining specifications before speaking, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Excuse me. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for someone. A friend. Have you heard of anyone named Rimuru?" The tech priest turned optical sensors, focusing on her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his mechadendrites twitched and warning glyphs flashed across chest-mounted displays. His voice emerged through a vox grill stripped of human warmth. Unidentified entity, energy signature beyond parameters, classification unknown. His sensors swept her again. Possible abominable intelligence, activating security protocols. "Wait," Milim said, raising her hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Security alert, Manufactorum Complex Theta. Unknown entity detected. Potential threat classification extreme. All units respond." Throughout Vethra 9, the alert propagated with mechanical efficiency. In the Fabricator General Sanctum, Theta 7 processed the data unknown entity asking about Rimuru Tempest, the slime god Xenos entity of extreme concern. His conclusion, formed with digital certainty, another construct seeking the blue abomination. His orders transmitted across all channels. Activate all Skitari legions. Prepare Titan deployment. This false machine spirit must be destroyed. Milim stood as alarms wailed throughout the Forge world. Red emergency lighting pulsed. She looked at the tech priest, confused. "I don't understand. I only asked a question." From 3 corridors, Skitarii warriors emerged in perfect formation. Hundreds of augmented soldiers, radium carbines, and arc rifles raised. Behind them came Cataphren battle servitors and onager dune-crawlers. Within minutes, Milim found herself surrounded by hundreds of armed units. A Vox-enhanced voice boomed unidentified construct. You violate Mechanicus protocols and Imperial law. State your designation and submit to immediate disassembly. Milim's eyes widened. Disassembly? I'm not a construct. I'm Milim. I'm just looking for my friend. I don't want trouble. The response came not in words, but in weapons fire. Hundreds of radium carbines discharged simultaneously, filling the corridor with radioactive rounds. Plasma calivers added superheated streams. Arc rifles unleashed electrical energy. The combined firepower would have vaporized a space marine in seconds. The Aurora crown manifested around Milim without conscious thought. Every projectile, every energy beam simply ceased to exist upon contact, not deflected, erased from reality. When the barrage ended, Milim stood untouched amid smoke and heat-distorted air. Her expression had shifted to hurt. Why, she asked quietly. I just asked about my friend. Why are you attacking me? The Skitarii did not answer. They simply resumed firing, their logic concluding sustained fire would succeed where the first attempt had failed. Through auger networks, Fabricator General Theta 7 monitored with growing alarm. Standard forces proved entirely ineffective, which meant escalation. Activate the God Machines. Let the Omnissiah's fury be made manifest. Deep within Titan Manufactorum's ancient systems awakened. Massive doors ground open. The ground trembled as weights measured in megatons shifted. Through industrial haze, shapes emerged that dwarfed buildings, Warhound Scout Titans, striding on reverse-jointed legs, Reaver Battle Titans, whose footsteps left craters in Ferrocrete. Milim felt them before she saw them, massive presences, each containing a spark of something almost alive. Through skylights, she glimpsed their forms walking cathedrals of destruction, the Mechanicus's gods made manifest. Please, Milim called out, knowing these machines would not listen. I don't want to fight. I just want to find Rimuru. The nearest Warhound's response was a plasma lance hot enough to match a star's core, fired at point-blank range. Milim's Aurora crown expanded, turning the plasma aside. The beam carved through 3 adjacent manufactorums, vaporizing thousands of servitors and workers instantly. Horror washed over Milim. They're killing their own people, just to get to me. More Titans approached. The Skitarii continued their relentless assault. She couldn't keep defending, more people would die in crossfire. She needed to stop this without causing deaths. Then it came to her, if she disabled their weapons, they couldn't attack anymore. Target just the technology, leave people unharmed. Take away dangerous toys before they hurt themselves. No deaths, no permanent harm. Perfect in its simplicity. Milim closed her eyes, gathering dragon essence with deliberate care. Pink and blue light bled together, shaped with different intent than terror. Not destruction. Not erasure, transformation. She would change the metal's fundamental nature, render it incompatible with their technology. She released the energy in a silent pulse that radiated outward. The crimson cataclysm was silent. No explosions, no screams, no dramatic destruction. The wave of dragon essence simply washed across Vethra 9, penetrating every structure, touching every piece of metal, from smallest bolt to largest titan. And as it passed, the metal changed. Gray steel turned deep crimson, silver circuits blushed red, bronze darkened to burgundy. Every piece of metal on Vethra 9 shifted to a uniform shade matching Milim's power. But the change was more than cosmetic. The metal's fundamental properties had been altered at conceptual level. At a quantum state that defied conventional physics, each atom's electron configuration had been rewritten into what could only be described as null parity. A state that existed outside the binary logic that machine spirits used to interface with matter. Still solid, still structurally sound, but no longer conducting electricity as it should. No longer resonating at frequencies machine spirits could perceive or manipulate. No longer responding to sacred protocols that had guided these systems for millennia. The effects were immediate and absolute. Weapons stopped firing mid-burst. Power armor locked in place, trapping Skitarii inside. Vehicles' engines died. Communication systems went silent, and the Titans froze mid-step, their machine spirits simply vanishing. The god machines became statues towering crimson tombstones. Milim opened her eyes and looked at what she had wrought. The entire world had turned red. Buildings stood like rust-colored bones. Skitarii stood motionless in armor prisons. Titans loomed overhead, frozen in poses of aggression that would never complete. Throughout Vethra 9, realization spread with viral horror. Fabricator General Theta 7 stared at readouts that made no sense. Everything reported operational, yet nothing worked. His connection to machine spirits, the constant communion defining his existence, was gone, like being struck deaf and blind simultaneously. Machine spirits, silent. The Omnissiah does not answer. This is impossible. Across the Forge world, tech priests fell to their knees. For beings who had replaced most humanity with machinery, the sudden silence was more than malfunction. It was apostasy made manifest. Their gods had abandoned them. Some wept. Others stood frozen minds, unable to process reality where their faith had been rendered false. A few began to pray in desperate human words, begging for understanding, for mercy, for any sign. Milim looked around at the panic she had caused, and cold realization settled in her chest. She had seen Forge worlds as places where people made weapons. What she hadn't understood, Forge worlds were made of weapons. These people didn't just use technology, they were technology. Their bodies, augmented minds, interfaced with machine society, structured around systems now completely non-functional. Without those systems, no communication beyond shouting. No transportation beyond walking, no food production, no water purification, no atmosphere processing. Everything required machines. She had meant to disarm them. Instead, she had killed their civilization. "Oh no," Milim whispered. "What did I do?" She walked through frozen Skitarii, touched one's armor gently. The trooper inside, alive, conscious, tried to speak but managed only muffled sounds through a helmet that wouldn't open. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I was just trying to make you stop attacking." She continued through the manufactorum, seeing the full scope. Workers trapped in dead exoskeletons. Servitors collapsed. Tech priests trying desperately to manually operate systems requiring electronic interfaces they no longer possessed. In the distance, a frozen titan groaned as metal stressed under its own weight, crimson structure unable to compensate without its machine spirit. It would stand for now, but eventually, inevitably collapse. They all would. From an observation deck, she saw thousands below, trapped, panicking, all facing the same realization their world had ended. Not through destruction, but through transformation. Their Forge world still existed, but was no longer a Forge world. Just a red planet full of useless metal and stranded people. "This place doesn't know where Rimuru is," she said quietly. "And I broke everything here." She thought about trying to fix it, reverse what she'd done, but she didn't know how. The transformation had been instinctive, powered by dragon essence, operating beyond simple physical manipulation. Next time, she whispered, heavy with guilt, "I won't interfere. I won't try to help. I'll just ask and leave, no matter what happens." The dimensional tear opened behind her kaleidoscope light against uniform crimson. She paused at the threshold to look back. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I thought I was helping." Then she was gone, leaving the red Mechanica to face its new reality without machines, without the Omnissiah's voice, without any certainty that had defined their existence. In orbit, emergency beacons fired mechanical systems independent of the planet's infrastructure. The distress calls would take weeks to reach Mars, too late for those depending on immediate life support. On Mars, when reports arrived, the Fabricator General would declare Vethra 9 lost, not to enemy action, but to theological impossibility. A Forge world where the machine god no longer spoke, where technology itself had been rendered heretical through transformation. Some among the Mechanicus would call for its destruction. Others would demand study, seeking to understand what had rewritten matter's fundamental nature. But a few, the survivors who remained, those who learned to live without the Omnissiah's voice in their augments, would begin a different path. Within a decade, they would found a new creed, the Red Mechanica, worshipping silence as the final voice of the Omnissiah, believing that in the absence of machine spirits, they had achieved a pure communion with the machine god. They would paint their remaining flesh crimson in remembrance of the day their false gods fell silent and the true faith began. And on Terra, when Guilliman received word, he would update threat assessment again. Not because she had killed, she hadn't, not directly, but because she had demonstrated something more disturbing, the ability to end civilizations through kindness, to destroy through mercy, to bring about apocalypse while trying to help. In the Tempest sector's core, deep within the azure field that had drawn Milim across the galaxy, Ciel detected a disturbance in the data stream she monitored across dimensions. A forged world had transformed its technological signature, shifting from standard Imperial frequencies to something else entirely. A crimson null state that matched energy patterns she had recorded from a single source. Analysis Milim Nava has arrived in proximity to Tempest Exclusion Zone. Emotional state escalating guilt. Probability of controlled behavior declining. Recommendation prepare for imminent contact. But Rimuru, locked within the core, maintaining the Tempest field that protected millions, could only acknowledge the warning and continue his vigil. He could not leave, could not reach out, could only wait and hope that when Milim finally arrived, she would be ready to listen. And in the warp, Milim continued toward the next world, toward the next attempt to find her friend. The Red Mechanica would remember her as the Crimson Goddess who broke their faith. The next world would learn a different lesson entirely. The entity designated Crimson Starfall was not learning to be less dangerous. She was learning to be dangerous in new and increasingly unpredictable ways. Each attempt to reduce harm created consequences that rippled outward in patterns even she couldn't foresee. Terra had learned to fear her power. Vethra 9 had learned to fear her compassion. What would the next world learn? What lesson would be written in the colors of her passing, and would anyone survive long enough to remember it? The craft world. Nalir had been dying for 3 years. Once home to 5 million Eldar, their consciousness woven into the infinity circuit that gave the craft world its heartbeat, it now drifted through the void like a corpse. Wraithbone structures twisted into angles that hurt to perceive gardens, withered into forests of thorns. Towers cracked and bleeding, something not quite light. The infinity circuit still sang, but its songs had become screams 5 million souls trapped in endless nightmare, as chaos corruption spread through the very substance of their afterlife. Slanesh had found them. She who thirsts had broken through their defenses 3 years ago, transforming the craft world into a feeding ground where the living endured horrors, while the dead found no peace, only eternal torment, as their souls were slowly digested. Milim Nava arrived in this hell without understanding what she had found. The dimensional tear opened in what had once been a meditation garden, now a twisted maze of crystalline thorns pulsing with sickly purple light. She stepped through carefully, her caution now carrying the additional weight of Vethra 9's guilt. No more interference. Just ask, get directions, leave. The Dragon Essence Trail was stronger here. Rimuru had passed through within the last month spent time here. She needed someone who remembered him, who could tell her which direction he'd gone. She walked through corrupted corridors where shadows moved with predatory hunger, and voices sang in ecstasy and agony that could not be separated. Through a collapsed archway she found them, perhaps 20 Eldar, mostly civilians, with a handful of guardian warriors huddled in what had once been a shrine. The wraithbone walls bore prayers and protective runes, most now pulsing with corruption, fighting against the few clean symbols still holding. The Eldar looked haggard, bearing wounds that should have been fatal, but weren't kept alive by malicious warp energies that refused to let them die cleanly. A Farseer stood among them. Psychic hood cracked one eye socket empty and weeping. but her remaining eye was alert. When Milim approached, it fixed on her with intensity, suggesting the seer saw far more than physical form. Milim approached carefully, keeping her voice soft, apologizing for the intrusion. She asked about Rimuru Tempest. Had anyone seen him, knew which way he'd gone? Guardian warriors raised their weapons immediately, but the Farseer stayed their hands with a gesture. Her remaining eye studied Milim with intensity that suggested she saw far more than physical form. This one was not of chaos, she announced, not of the warp at all. The Farseer's expression shifted when Milim mentioned Rimuru's name. Yes, she knew the Azure One. He'd come 3 months ago when their defenses first failed, helped evacuate the young ones who could still be saved. Without his intervention, all 5 million souls would have been lost to She Who Thirsts. Instead, perhaps 200,000 had escaped. Warmth flickered in Milim's chest hearing this. That sounded exactly like Rimuru. The Farseer began to give directions galactic east toward something she called the Tempest Sector when her head snapped toward an entrance. Her psychic senses screamed warning. They had been found. The Eldar moved with practiced desperation, warriors placing themselves between civilians and entrance. Children, Milim realized, several children were pushed to the shrine's back. Through the entrance poured chaos cultists, screaming praise to their dark prince. Warp tears had connected the dying craft world to nearby Imperial ruins. Through those rifts slipped these corrupted humans, bodies, twisted faces split by too many tongues wearing tattered Imperial uniforms. Survivors who had chosen damnation over death. The Guardians opened fire. Shuriken discs tore corrupted flesh, but more cultists kept coming. A chaos sorcerer emerged, chains dripping with impossible substances. Warp energy crackled as he raised his 6-pointed staff. Milim stood frozen as battle erupted. She could stop this. One attack and the cultists would be dead. But Vethra 9 flashed through her mind, the red planet trapped Skitarii, weeping tech priests. She had promised herself, no interference, no matter what. A cultist broke through the Guardian line, rushing toward civilians with rusted blade raised. An Eldar mother pushed her child behind her, raising arms futilely. Milim's hands clenched until nails drew blood. "Don't interfere! Don't interfere! You always make it worse!" The cultist laughed and swung. The mother screamed. And Milim remained frozen as the blade descended toward a child who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. "Don't interfere! Don't!" The child's scream cut through Milim's paralysis like a blade through her heart. In that instant, she saw not the Eldar child, but Gaia, her first best friend millennia ago. Gaia had died because Milim lost control, because her power exploded in an emotional storm she couldn't contain. She had promised after Gaia's death that she would learn control, never let emotions rule her power. But she had also promised Gaia protect those who can't protect themselves. Her eyes shifted from blue to crimson. The cultist's arm, the one holding the blade, simply ceased to exist up to the shoulder. Milim's other hand closed around his throat, crushing it with terrifying gentleness. She caught the falling child, setting the small Eldar down with infinite care behind her. Her voice carried harmonics it had never possessed as she told them to get the children away. Now, the cultists stared. The chaos sorcerer's eyes widened. "Interesting. Such delicious emotions. You are..." Milim moved. She didn't fly or leap. She simply decided to be in front of the sorcerer, and reality adjusted. Her hand closed around his staff and metal crumbled to powder. Her presence created a dead zone where even chaos struggled to manifest. She spoke quietly about children and harm and things she could not allow. The sorcerer laughed, breaking glass in distant screams, calling her foolish alone against legions. He raised his arms, the 6-pointed star on his forehead blazing as he summoned a herald of pleasure. Reality tore with ragged wrongness. Through the tier stepped a keeper of secrets, greater demon of Slanesh, its form shifting between masculine and feminine, beautiful and horrific, never settling. It purred about delicious guilt and magnificent rage. Milim raised both hands and power erupted from her core. The annihilation spiral began as a small vortex of pink and crimson energy between her palms. But with each revolution, it grew fed by suppressed emotions, guilt over red mechanica, rage at seeing innocence threatened, fear of failing again, grief for Gaia for all the lives accidentally destroyed for the possibility Rimuru might be disappointed. The spiral expanded outward, beautiful and terrible, a rotating zone of pure destructive intent. Anything touched didn't burn or explode. It ceased to be erased so fundamentally that even souls were torn from the warp and consumed. The Keeper of Secrets tried to dodge moving at impossible speeds, but the spiral was faster, or perhaps it decided where the demon would be, and reality obeyed. The greater demon's scream as it truly died, not banished but destroyed so completely. Slaanesh couldn't reclaim its essence, echoed across dimensions. The cultists died next, caught in expanding spiral. Some tried to run, others tried to fight. All failed. The spiral consumed without distinction, without mercy, without leaving corpses. They were there, then weren't. The Farseer shouted warnings in Eldar tongue, her psychic senses screaming. Everyone needed to reach the webway portal. Milim was losing control, but Milim couldn't hear. The rage was too loud, guilt too heavy, spiral too hungry. It fed on her emotions, and her emotions fed on death's creating feedback loop growing stronger each second. She had meant to save children, stop cultists, do something right. But the spiral expanded beyond the shrine, spreading through corrupted corridors, consuming everything. Cultists died by hundreds, demons by dozens, and Eldar civilian survivors hiding uninvolved in the fight died screaming as spiral reached them. Milim tried desperately to stop it, pull the power back. Her voice cracked with anguish, commanding it to cease. But the harder she tried to control it, the more her desperation fed the spiral. A craft world section simply vanished, erased along with everyone inside. Another followed, and another. The infinity circuit screamed as souls that should have been safely stored were caught and destroyed, truly killed beyond resurrection or reincarnation. When the spiral finally collapsed, not because Milim controlled it, but because she'd exhausted herself, she fell to her knees amid ash and silence. Within the warp itself, something unprecedented occurred. For the first time since chaos learned to feast on souls, Slaanesh recoiled. The souls consumed by the annihilation spiral did not feed her. They simply ceased to exist, deleted from the fundamental fabric of reality. The Dark Prince screamed in silence, recognizing something that operated outside even her hunger's reach. The shrine was gone, the cultists were gone, the demons were gone, and so were most of the Eldar she'd been trying to save. Milim stared at her hands shaking. They were clean. The spiral left no blood, no ash, just emptiness. The Farseer emerged from behind a wraithbone pillar that had somehow survived her remaining eye, reflecting horror and pity. She walked slowly toward Milim, each step carrying uncountable years' weight. She spoke the numbers with quiet devastation. 2,400,000 that had been the craft world's population when chaos corruption began. Perhaps 200,000 had remained after the Azure One's evacuation. Now, perhaps 20,000 survived. Milim had killed 2.4 million souls. Most were already dead, trapped in the circuit, but she had killed them again. Killed them truly, given them oblivion instead of torment. Milim couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 2.4 million. The Farseer knelt beside her, surprisingly placing a hand on Milim's shoulder. She had seen Milim's heart in that moment, trying to protect the children. But meaning well, didn't resurrect the dead, didn't restore souls, didn't undo genocide. Milim whispered apologies, utterly inadequate. She had seen the children and couldn't stop herself. The Farseer interrupted gently. Those children now had no families. Milim had saved them from cultists, but also killed their parents' siblings, entire clans. She gestured toward a protected alcove where Eldar children huddled together, crying with soul-deep grief. The Farseer asked if Milim understood. The cultists would have killed thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. Milim had killed millions. Her help had been quantifiably worse than the genocide they already faced. Milim remembered Gaia, remembered promising after her friend's death that she would learn control, never let this happen again. But here she was centuries later, same mistake, losing control, killing those she meant to protect. "I didn't know," she whispered in her native tongue, words carrying sorrow deeper than any translation could reach. "I didn't know it would be like this. I was just so angry." The Farseer sighed, carrying millennia of sorrow. She asked why Milim sought the Azure One. What would she tell him when they met? Milim stood slowly, legs shaking. Her voice broke as she spoke. Tell him she was a monster. Tell him she had killed 2.4 million people trying to save 20. Tell him she wasn't worthy of being his friend anymore. But she still needed to apologize. The Farseer studied her, then nodded. Galactic East, toward a sector humans called the Tempest. Rimuru had gone there to maintain something called a field to protect those who chose to shelter under his aegis. She paused. Perhaps he could teach what the Eldar could not, how to carry power's weight without being crushed. Milim asked about the survivors. The Farseer assured her they would endure. They always did. The remaining 20,000 would flee through Webway to other craft worlds. They would tell others the Crimson Goddess had come and ended the chaos corruption, even if the price was almost everything they had left. In a way, Milim had freed those souls from torment. Just not the salvation they wanted. Milim turned toward where dimensional boundary was weakest. Before leaving, she paused. Asked the Farseer to take care of the children. It was her fault they were orphans. The Farseer promised they would. The Eldar always cared for their young. That was why Milim's actions hurt so much. She had destroyed families to save children, given them survival, but taken away their reason to celebrate it. Milim nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The dimensional tear opened kaleidoscope light, spilling across corrupted wraithbone. She stepped through without looking back, unable to bear seeing children's grief any longer. In the warp, traveling toward Tempest Sector, Milim moved slowly for the first time in her long existence. Before she had flown through dimensions with joy and wonder. Now, each movement felt like dragging a mountain. The faces of the dead Eldar, she would never know children who would grow up orphaned because of her rage, followed her through Imperium. She could see the Tempest field ahead, a beacon of azure light cutting through the warp's madness. Rimuru was there. Her best friend, the one person who had never judged her, was so close. But now she carried tooth and 520,000 deaths. Terra's warning had killed no one. Vethra 9's transformation destroyed civilization without claiming lives. But Nahlir was different. Those 2.4 million souls hadn't died in crossfire or accident. They had died because Milim chose to fight, chose to intervene, chose to let rage control her power. "I'm a monster," she whispered to the empty warp in her ancient tongue. "I'm a monster, and now I have to tell Rimuru that." Ahead, the Tempest field beckoned, and Milim, carrying guilt's weight that would have crushed a lesser being, continued forward. Because no matter how much it hurt, how unworthy she felt, she owed Rimuru the truth. She owed him the confession. She owed him the chance to reject her, to tell her yes, she was a monster, and monsters had no place among those who wanted to build something good. Far away, deep within the Tempest sector's core, Rimuru Tempest stood at the heart of the azure field he had been maintaining for 6 months. The crystalline chamber pulsed with his consciousness, billions of calculations per second, keeping the protective barrier stable across 15 parsecs. Then he felt it. A ripple crossed the azure field, faint but unmistakable. Crimson energy crying out somewhere in the warp, a dragon essence signature he knew as well as his own. Pain, guilt, desperation, Milim. Ciel's analysis resonated in his mind. Milim Nava's emotional state had deteriorated significantly. Energy signatures suggested recent catastrophic event. Estimated arrival within 72 hours. Rimuru's slime body rippled with concern. She was coming here. Ciel confirmed. Dragon factor tracking indicated direct approach to Tempest exclusion zone. Recommendation: prepare for emotional distress management. Probability of controlled encounter 43%. Rimuru looked at the swirling azure energy around him, the barrier protecting millions who had chosen to shelter under his protection. He couldn't leave, not yet. Not while the field required constant maintenance. But Milim was coming, and from what he could sense through their shared dragon essence, she was carrying a weight that threatened to break even her ancient spirit. He called Diablo through their connection. The demon's response was immediate deferential. Rimuru gave his orders. Milim was approaching. When she arrived, be gentle with her. Something terrible had happened. Diablo acknowledged understanding and would prepare accordingly. Rimuru turned his attention back to the field, but part of his awareness remained focused on that distant crimson pulse growing slowly closer. His best friend was hurting, and he couldn't even go to meet her. All he could do was wait, maintain the barrier, and hope that when Milim finally arrived, she would still be able to hear the words he needed to say. The galaxy had learned to fear her power at Terra. It had learned to fear her compassion at Vethra 9. And now at Nahlir, it had learned the most dangerous lesson. When Milim Nava tried to do the right thing, the consequences could be worse than any evil. Belisar 4 had been a world of hope once. Milim emerged from the dimensional tear expecting survivors who might remember Rimuru, who could tell her which direction he'd gone. The Dragon Essence Trail was strongest here, stronger than anywhere else she'd followed. Rimuru had spent significant time on this world. The signature was recent, vibrant, unmistakable. What she found instead was ash. Cities were shadows, oceans were salt, the sky was scar tissue. 3 images burned themselves into her mind as she descended thermal outlines where buildings stood crystallized salt flats, where seas had boiled and magma bleeding through a cracked crust like infected wounds. This was Exterminatus, the Imperium's final solution. She landed in what had once been a marketplace, her feet sinking into ash that had been people. The Dragon Essence Trail ended here. Not faded or dispersed ended. As if Rimuru had simply ceased to exist at this exact location. She knelt, touching the ash gently. Beneath the destruction's layers, she could feel residual azure field energy. Rimuru had been here, had activated his barrier, had tried to protect this place. But the field was gone now, collapsed or destroyed, and everything it had sheltered was dust. Her hands began to shake. She walked through the dead city, searching for anything that might explain. Street by street, building by building. Everywhere the same evidence of life, then evidence of death. No survivors, no bodies intact enough to bury, just ash and shadows and lingering azure energy that had failed to save them. In a residential district, she found a child's toy half buried in gray powder, a small wooden horse miraculously intact. She picked it up carefully, and something inside her cracked. In what might have been a government building, she found Imperial markers, warning beacons left by the fleet that had carried out the Exterminatus. She touched one, and its data core activated. Sector Belisar 4 status. Purged authorization. Inquisitor Lord Corvanus. Threat classification. Xenos infiltration. Tempest Federation casualties. 120,000 estimated justification. Unauthorized Xenos protection. Population refused Imperial compliance. 120,000. That was how many people had died here. Not from chaos, not from invasion, but because they had accepted Rimuru's protection instead of the Imperium's authority. Milim's hands clenched, crushing the beacon to powder. The Dragon Essence Trail ended where the azure field had been strongest. Rimuru had been maintaining the barrier when the bombardment struck. The signature simply stopped at that moment. No escape, no evacuation, no dimensional tear, just cessation. She thought of the Imperium's response to her at Terra, immediate attack, zealous fury, refusal to listen. She thought of Corvanus calling her Xenos abomination, ordering Grey Knights to fire without provocation. And she thought of Rimuru, kind, patient Rimuru, who had spent months helping worlds transition to peaceful coexistence, who had saved 200,000 Eldar before she arrived at Nahlir. The Imperium would have seen him the same way. Xenos threat, something to be destroyed. If she had been here a day sooner, would he still be alive? That single thought poisoned every breath. A day, hours, minutes. The difference between arriving to find him maintaining the field and arriving to find ash. Memories flooded back. Meeting Rimuru for the first time, learning that despite his power, he preferred diplomacy to destruction. Those quiet moments in Tempest, when he'd tried teaching her control, his patience unwavering. The way he'd called her friend without hesitation, without judgment, without fear. She had been alone for so long before meeting him, centuries of isolation after Gaia's death of being too powerful for anyone to approach without terror. Rimuru had been the first person in ages who saw her as Milim, not as the destroyer, just Milim. And now he was gone. Her legs gave out. She knelt in the ash, the wooden horse clutched in one hand. The realization settled over her like physical weight. She was alone again. But this time was worse, because she had remembered what it felt like to have a friend, to belong somewhere, to matter beyond her power. She could have saved him. If she'd been faster, if she hadn't wasted time trying to be cautious after her mistakes. She could have been here, could have helped him hold the azure field. Instead, she had 2.4 million deaths on her hands, and Rimuru was ash. Time passed, she didn't know how much. Eventually, she stood. The wooden horse went into a small pocket dimension, preserved like Gaia's last gift had been preserved millennia ago. She looked up at the sky and truly saw what hung in orbit. The fleet. 200 Imperial vessels bearing the Inquisition sigil, holding position above Belisarth, monitoring the dead world. The fleet that had fired the cyclonic torpedoes, the fleet that had killed 120,000 people, the fleet commanded by Corvanus, the same man who had attacked her at Terra. Something inside Milim shifted. Not broke that had happened at Nahlir, not cracked that had happened at Vethra 9. This was something crystallizing, hardening, becoming sharp and cold and absolute. These people had killed Rimuru, had destroyed the one person who had made her feel less alone, had taken away her best friend because he was Xenos, and therefore beneath mercy, beneath even attempting communication before annihilation. The grief began transforming into something else, something darker. All the accumulated pain and guilt and frustration and loss condensing into a single burning point. Energy began rising from her core, different from before. Not uncontrolled spiral, not accidental transformation, not defensive warning. This was deliberate, focused, cold despite the burning fury. Her eyes shifted from blue to crimson and stayed there, stabilizing into a color deeper than blood. The crimson rage was not a technique, but a state of being, ancient beyond measure, a thing from true dragon heritage that Milim had never fully accessed because she had never needed it. It was what happened when Dragonkin lost everything that mattered and decided the universe would pay. Power erupted from her in a column of crimson light, punching through atmosphere into orbit visible from 1,000 light years away. The dead planet trembled. Ash rose in spiraling clouds. The remaining atmosphere ignited. Her voice carried across the void, reaching every ship unavoidable in its presence. You killed him. You killed Rimuru, and now you will answer for it. Far away, something vast stirred as if the azure field itself trembled. Aboard the flagship Righteous Fury, every alarm screamed simultaneously. Inquisitor Lord Corvanus recognized his mistake instantly. They should have fled the moment the entity was detected, should have initiated emergency warp jump, should have done anything except remain with a being who could crack moons and now had reason to use that power. But even as he gave the order to flee, he knew it was too late. Through the viewport, he watched the crimson column growing brighter, expanding, reaching toward the fleet like a hand of judgment. Milim rose from Belisar IV's surface on wings of pure crimson energy. She wasn't flying, she was simply deciding where she needed to be, and reality adjusted. The first ship, a destroyer on the fleet's edge, died when she passed through its void shields. Where she touched, hull matter ceased to exist. The crew had time for one collective scream broadcast across Vox channels before silence. Contact lost with a battle barge attempted to target her. Its lance batteries fired. The beam struck her aurora crown and stopped being. All batteries report negative effect target unharmed. The barge itself died moments later. Shields at maximum. She is torn in half, breaking through Section 7. Evacuate, evacuate. Corvanus watched readouts cascade into failure, each death taking seconds, each murder absolute. Destroyer, cruiser, escort squadron, battle barge. The names vanished from tactical displays as if they had never existed. 10 minutes, 100 ships, 20,000 souls gone. When she finally reached the righteous fury, Corvanus stood alone on the bridge. His crew had fled. He had ordered them to go. She appeared on the bridge without bothering to breach conventionally, small, perhaps 5 feet tall, appearing 12 years old. But her crimson eyes carried weight beyond anything Corvanus had faced in decades. Her voice was quiet but absolute. You gave the order to destroy this world. You killed everyone Rimuru was protecting. You killed him. Corvanus forced himself to stand straight to meet those terrible eyes. If he was to die, he would die as an inquisitor. The entity designated Rimuru Tempest was Xenos. His presence corrupted Imperial citizens. The exterminatus was necessary. Contamination. Milim repeated the word in indictment. You called protection contamination, called kindness corruption. She stepped closer, reality warping around her footsteps. Rimuru came to this world because they were dying. He saved them, asked nothing in return except that they be allowed to live in peace, and you killed them for accepting his help. You are correct about one thing. Some powers are too dangerous to be allowed, but the danger isn't Xenos. It isn't people trying to help. She raised one hand, crimson energy gathering precisely controlled despite its magnitude. The danger is you. Humans who kill first and never understand what they're destroying, who mistake mercy for weakness and compassion for corruption. Rimuru never killed anyone who didn't attack first, never destroyed a world, never annihilated millions because they were different from him. Can you say the same? The attack launched not at him, at the flagship itself, Drago Buster, the Heaven Shatter. Impact amplified 100-fold, struck the reactor core and simply erased it from reality. The entire vessel, 8 kilometers of adamantium and ancient technology, ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris. Just empty space where a flagship had been. Corvanus had time for one final thought. What have we done? Milim floated in the void, looking at what remained. Escape pods scattered in every direction. Perhaps 100 ships remained the furthest ones that had managed warp jumps. She let them flee, not from mercy, but because word needed to spread. The Imperium needed to understand what they had provoked. 20,000 when she'd arrived. Now 180,000, virtually the entire Crusade fleet. 9 battle barges, 43 cruisers, over 100 escorts, crew complements, space marine chapters, indentured servants, tech priests, navigators, all gone. She had killed them in 23 minutes, not by losing control, not by accident, by conscious choice, by deliberate application of power. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not horror, not guilt, just emptiness. Her heartbeat slowed until it was indistinguishable from silence. Even breathing felt like mimicry of life, something done because bodies were supposed to breathe, not because she needed air. The divine numbness settled over her like a shroud, insulating her from the magnitude of what she'd done. She descended back to the surface to where the azure field signature was strongest, where Rimuru had made his last stand. The planet's atmosphere ignited completely from residual energy. Fire spread across continents. The crying star, that's what Imperial records would call it later. A world that wept fire after the Crimson Goddess killed an entire fleet above it. Milim knelt in flames that couldn't touch her and finally allowed herself to weep. Not for the 180,000 she'd just killed. Not even for the 2.4 million at Nahlir. She wept for Rimuru, for Gaia, for every person who had tried to see her as more than a weapon. She wept for being too late, too dangerous, too broken to save anyone who mattered. Far away, deep within the Tempest sector's core, something impossible happened. Rimuru Tempest stood at the azure field's heart when a ripple crossed his consciousness. Not through sensors, but through the dragon essence connection he shared with only one person. anguish, rage, grief beyond measure, and beneath it all, absolute conviction that he was dead. His eyes widened. Ciel's response came immediately. Analysis Milim Nava has located Belisar 4. Energy signature suggests catastrophic emotional cascade. Recommendation, immediate contact attempt. I can't leave the core. If I stop maintaining the field, then do not stop. But you must reach her. The dragon essence connection allows communication. She believes you dead. The consequences are escalating. Rimuru closed his eyes, maintaining the field with one part of his mind, while reaching through dragon essence with another. The connection was faint across such distance strained by the warp, but it was there. He sent his consciousness through that connection like a whisper through dimensions. Milim, I'm alive. I'm here. Please hear me. I'm not dead. The message crossed the galaxy at speeds beyond light, carried by the fundamental bond between dragonkin. On Belisar 4, kneeling in flames, Milim Nava heard a voice she thought she'd never hear again. She froze, terrified that if she acknowledged the sound, it would vanish. The voice came again, clearer. Milim, it's Rimuru. I'm alive. I'm in the Tempest sector core. I've been here for 6 months maintaining the field. I couldn't leave. I'm so sorry you thought I was dead. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through trying to find me. A pause, then his voice carried warmth she'd forgotten existed. But I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm alive because you believed I could be. That belief matters more than any mistake. Please come home. The flames around her flickered and died as her power withdrew. The crying star dimmed. The rage drained away, leaving only exhausted confusion. Her voice cracked. Rimuru, you're alive. Yes, I'm alive, and I've been waiting for you. The wooden horse fell from nerveless fingers. The crimson rage collapsed completely, leaving her trembling. She had killed 180,000 people, believing Rimuru was dead, seeking vengeance for a murder that hadn't happened. And he was alive. Had been alive this whole time. I killed them. The fleet. 180,000 people. I thought they'd killed you. I know, I felt it through our connection. Come to Tempest, Milim. Come home. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. She looked at the dead world around her, at orbital space filled with debris that had been a fleet. The death toll kept climbing. 2.7 million now. But the 180,000 in orbit, those were hers. She had chosen to kill them with precision and control. I don't deserve to come home. I'm a monster, Rimuru. 2.7 million people dead because of me. You're my best friend. That's all that matters. Everything else we can work on together. Please come home. The dimensional tear opened behind her. She needed time. Needed to process that Rimuru was alive and that she'd just committed mass murder based on mistaken belief. I'll come, but I need a few hours to prepare, to stop shaking. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. And Milim, I'm not disappointed in you. Angry about the deaths, yes. Sad about your pain, absolutely. But not disappointed. Not in you. The tear closed around her, and she was back in the warp, traveling slowly toward the Tempest sector that glowed ahead. Behind her, Belisar 4 burned the crying star monument to grief and rage and the terrible things that happened when gods lost what they loved. 180,000 dead in vengeance for a death that never happened. The Imperium would remember this, would add it to her tally. But they would be wrong about one thing. Milim Nava wasn't dangerous because she was Xenos. She was dangerous because she loved too deeply, grieved too completely, and possessed power unlimited enough to make the universe pay for her pain. And now she carried 2.7 million deaths, and the knowledge that the one person she'd avenged hadn't actually died. The weight of that mistake would join all the others, another layer of guilt pressing down on an ancient soul beginning to crack. The Tempest field glowed ahead, home, safety, Rimuru. But first, she needed to prepare for the hardest conversation of her impossibly long life, the one where she would explain that she'd become everything she'd feared, a monster who destroyed worlds and called it love. The crying star burned behind her, and somewhere in the galaxy, 100 ships fled, carrying word of what the Crimson Goddess could do when provoked beyond reason. Terra had learned to fear her power. Vethra 9 had learned to fear her compassion, Nalir had learned to fear her rage, and now Belisar IV taught the final lesson: never make Milim Nava believe someone she loves is dead, because the vengeance of a grieving god makes the galaxy itself weep fire. Milim emerged from the warp at the exclusion zone's edge and stopped transfixed. The void around her thrummed with power, the kind only Rimuru could weave. For a heartbeat, she just watched the azure field stretching before her like a living ocean, 15 parsecs wrapped in translucent blue light, pulsing with his essence. The calm before two apocalypses converged. For 6 months, he had maintained this, alone. Every second holding back the warp's madness while she'd been destroying worlds searching for him. Then she saw what attacked it. From the east, biological horror, the devouring convergence, swarming the field's boundary. Millions of Tyrannid Zerg hybrids testing probing learning. At their heart moved the Omega Leviathan Bio-Titan, larger than battleships, coordinating attacks with terrifying intelligence. From the west, 3 Imperial Crusade fleets, over 300 vessels, lance batteries charging torpedoes, armed ready to repeat Belisar IV's annihilation. Between these forces, the azure field flickered under sustained assault. Through their dragon essence, connection came a whisper of exhaustion. Rimuru was holding, but barely. A figure materialized beside her, tall, wrapped in darkness. Diablo bowed, precisely informing her that Rimuru-sama had expected her arrival. She asked how long the siege had lasted. 72 hours for the convergence, he explained. Imperial fleets had arrived 36 hours after. Crimson energy flickered around him as he acknowledged his limitation. He couldn't defend both fronts simultaneously, and Rimuru-sama couldn't leave the core. Milim understood immediately. Split between threats, Diablo could only delay. The moment he committed to one side, the other would break through. She gave her orders quietly but firmly. Move everyone deeper inside, all civilians near the core. She would handle the perimeter. Diablo studied her face, began to mention the enemy numbers, but she cut him off. She knew what they numbered, knew what she'd done. But Rimuru was here protecting people who trusted him, and she wouldn't let them die because she was afraid of mistakes. Maybe she could do one thing right, protect instead of destroy. Diablo bowed deeper, offering only one warning with slight amusement: try not to destroy the field itself. Rimuru-sama was rather proud of it. Then he was gone. Milim floated alone, looking at 2 armies come to destroy her best friend's dream. Could she fight without losing control, without adding more deaths to her tally? She didn't know. But she had to try. Her eyes shifted to determination. Pink-blue, not crimson. This would be deliberate, measured. Protection, not destruction. She flew toward the convergence first. The Omega Leviathan sensed her massive form turning with predatory intelligence. It recognized apex predator, began coordinating swarm response. She needed to end this fast before adaptation. Both hands raised, energy gathering carefully. Not overwhelming tsunami, but focused surgical strike. Drago Buster. The beam lanced across void, struck the Leviathan's core, where hive mind and overmind merged and deleted it conceptually. The creature had time for one psychic shriek before it wasn't anymore. The swarm convulsed, suddenly leaderless. Still dangerous, but Diablo could handle scattered organisms. She turned west. Imperial fleets accelerating, seeing opportunity. Lead fleet commanded from eternal vigilance, thousands of lives aboard, following orders they believed righteous. Just like Corvanus, just like every human who'd responded to difference with violence. But she'd learned something since Belisar IV. Not everyone who attacked deserved to die. The fleets opened fire. Her Aurora crown manifested. Attacks struck and simply stopped being. She flew forward, analyzing each ship's structure. Unlike Vethra 9's mistake, she needed precision disable weapons only leave life support functional. She released calibrated energy pulse. It washed across the lead fleet. Weapon batteries darkened, lance arrays powered down, torpedo tubes locked, but light stayed on. Atmospherics continued. Communications remained. Vessels helpless but intact. Crews alive, unable to fight. Second Fleet, Third Fleet, ship after ship rendered combat ineffective. 0 casualties. It was working. Then Titan-class troopships began deploying. Drop pods launched containing God Machines, warlords, reavers, warhounds. They couldn't penetrate the field directly, but could hammer it from outside until it fractured. She intercepted the lead pod. The warlord inside immediately targeted her, firing everything simultaneously. She dodged, not attacking, trying to figure how to stop it without killing. More Titans landed. 20. God Machines coordinating fire on specific field sections. Azure energy flickering. Inside the core, Rimuru felt the stress. Field integrity declining, multiple breach points forming. He couldn't leave, but if Titans continued, the field would collapse anyway. Through Dragon Essence, he sent reassurance. Do what you need to do. I trust you. Milim heard his words and felt something settle. Not permission to lose control, but trust. The Titans were attacking the field. If they succeeded, millions died. If she destroyed Titans, dozens died. Crews inside each God Machine. Dozens versus millions. This was different from Nalir's panic or Belisar IV's rage. This was informed choice, clear cost-benefit, accepting responsibility for lesser evil. She didn't like it, hated it. But Rimuru trusted her. Millions depended on the field, and sometimes being protector meant getting blood on hands so others stayed clean. Comet Fist raw, kinetic impact, calculated force. She struck the lead warlord with precisely measured strength, impact sufficient to rupture reactor core. The God Machine exploded, instantly. Crew's death so fast they never felt pain. Then the next, and next. 23 Titans destroyed. Perhaps 200 crew dead. 200. Not 180,000, not 2.4 million. But still 200 lives ended by her decision. She felt each death as weight added to the mountain she carried. But she didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. Didn't lose control. The immediate threats neutralized, she finally allowed herself to assess. 0 deaths in fleets, thousands alive on disabled ships. Convergence scattered. Titans destroyed but field holding. 200 dead. Millions saved. It didn't feel like victory. Felt like survival with heavy price. But not the hollow emptiness of Belisar IV or soul-crushing guilt of Nalir. This was responsibility accepted, necessary evil chosen with eyes open. Through the field, she felt Rimuru's presence approaching. The core opened, and there he stood. Rimuru Tempest in human form, black hair, golden eyes, looking exhausted but smiling genuinely when he saw her. That smile nearly broke her. She stopped 10 meters away, unable to close the distance. All her prepared words died. How could she explain everything? How could she tell him she'd become exactly what she feared? Rimuru walked forward without hesitation. When he reached her, he opened his arms. She wanted to pull away to tell him he was wrong, that monsters didn't deserve comfort. But her strength failed when he didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. He wrapped his arms around her and held her steady. She froze, not daring to move, terrified she'd somehow hurt him. But he just held her patient, like he'd waited 6 months for this moment and wasn't going to let her guilt push him away. His voice was quiet, acknowledging he knew everything. Ciel had monitored it all. Terra Vethra 9, Nalir Belisar IV. Every death, every mistake. Each word confirmed he knew exactly what kind of monster she'd become. But then he said something unexpected. He'd learned from watching her that she never gave up trying. Every mistake had taught her something. She'd come here convinced she'd make things worse, but had fought with control he rarely saw. Had protected millions while only killing those actively threatening the field. She whispered about the 200 Titan crew members, killed deliberately. He didn't look away, didn't minimize it. Yes, because the alternative was millions dead. His hand moved to rest on her shoulder, a grounding touch. That was what being protector meant sometimes. making terrible choices so others didn't have to, carrying necessary evil's weight so innocence stayed innocent. He gestured toward the azure field around them, and she saw the exhaustion in the movement. He'd made similar choices, maintained this barrier knowing every day was a day he couldn't help outside. Let populations die in the wider galaxy to protect these specific millions. His gaze drifted outward towards space beyond the field where countless worlds burned. There was no clean moral high ground in war, just degrees of terrible necessity. She wanted to argue. But looking at his exhausted face, evidence of 6 months holding cosmic forces, she understood. He'd been making impossible choices every day, same as her. I thought you were dead. At Belisar 4, I saw the ash and collapsed field and your trail ending, and I thought they'd killed you, so I destroyed their fleet. 80,000 people, for vengeance that wasn't real. I know, I felt your grief through our connection, his expression filled with sorrow. I should have reached out sooner. If I'd done that, Belisar 4 never would have happened. That's not you were maintaining the field. And you were searching for your friend following the only trail you had. He squeezed her shoulders gently. We both made mistakes. Both carried deaths we wish we could undo, but we're here now together and we can learn from them instead of being crushed. She looked at him, this being who'd retained optimism despite everything, and felt something inside begin healing. Not absolution, but acceptance. He knew what she'd done and still called her friend. I don't know how to be what I was. The innocent version died somewhere between Terra and here. Good. Innocence is beautiful, but fragile. You're experienced now. You've seen power's worst parts and responsibility that comes with it. That makes you stronger, better able to protect because you understand stakes. He smiled. The Milim who left Tempest would have lost control fighting today, might have destroyed the entire sector. The Milim who came back calculated force-measured necessity, made hard calls that saved millions. That's not weakness, that's growth. How do you live with it? The choices that kill, the necessary evils. Some days better than others. He looked at protected lives. But I remember why I made those choices, who I was trying to save, and I try to ensure fewer people die next time. You're going to carry those 2.7 million deaths forever. That weight doesn't go away, but you can choose what to do with it. Let it crush you into paralysis or let it teach you to be more careful, more precise, more effective. And if I make more mistakes, then we learn from those too. Such certainty, such faith. You're not alone anymore. You have me, Diablo, everyone in Tempest. When you're struggling, reach out. Let someone help think it through. Not having to carry everything alone. Having someone who understood power's weight and didn't flinch. I'm gonna mess up again, she warned. Probably. But you'll also do amazing things. Save people I couldn't reach. Make hard calls I hesitate on. We're stronger together, your power and my wisdom, your passion and my calculation. He offered his hand. Want to help me protect this sector while figuring out how to be better than we were yesterday? She looked at the offer of partnership acceptance. Hope that maybe she could become more than her mistakes some. Then she took it, gripping firmly. Her voice was quiet but certain. Yeah, she'd like that. Rimuru's smile could have lit the sector. He confessed honestly 6 months alone had been boring. Diablo was great but took everything so seriously. He'd missed having someone who understood joy. Despite everything, she laughed. Small, broken, but real. Joy. Right. She'd work on remembering what that felt like. He promised they'd work on it together. For now, though, he needed to finish reinforcing the barrier, and she needed rest. Ciel had informed him she hadn't slept since Terra. She admitted maybe a few hours would help. He told her to take as long as needed. She was home now, safe, protected, allowed to rest without worrying the universe would burn. Home. The word felt foreign but warm. Maybe Tempest could be that. Maybe she could learn to belong somewhere again. She let him lead her deeper into the core. Behind them, the field pulsed with renewed strength, and throughout the sector, millions went about their lives never knowing how close they'd come to annihilation. In orbit, disabled Imperial ships began repairs crews alive to tell stories of mercy. And on Terra, Guilliman read reports and updated his assessment. Entity Milim Nava status allied with Tempest Protocol. Do not engage, do not provoke, do not threaten Tempest or Rimuru Tempest. Note: subject demonstrates learning, power limitless but restraint possible when protecting allies. Recommend treating Tempest as untouchable sovereign entity. Alternative is extinction-level retaliation. He added one final line. Perhaps the most dangerous entities are not those who cannot control their power, but those who choose very carefully when to use it. RG. And in the core, Milim slept dreamless and deep, while her best friend maintained the barrier that kept nightmares at bay. The journey had cost 2.7 million lives. Destroyed civilizations, orphaned children, carved catastrophe across the galaxy. But it taught her what her power was for protecting specific people she cared about in specific moments, when terrible choices had to be made carrying necessary evil's weight so others could live unburdened. She was still a monster, still carried apocalyptic death toll, still broke things more often than not. But she was Rimuru's monster now, Tempest's monster. A weapon pointed at darkness, finally understanding that the most dangerous power was the one wielded with precision, restraint, and wisdom, to know when killing 200 to save millions was the least terrible choice available. The Crimson Goddess had come home, and the galaxy held its breath, wondering if that made the universe safer or doomed. Beyond the field's edge, in the spaces between stars where light grew dim and reality grew thin, something vast stirred. Neither chaos nor convergence, neither Imperium nor any known threat, just watching, waiting, calculating. The azure field pulsed with renewed strength, unaware. Peace for now. But in the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium, peace was always temporary.